Okay, so today we're going deep on some pretty interesting stuff. Trust in institutions, change all that jazz, and even some local political drama that's been catching everyone's eye.
It's like a wild ride.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. We've got your sources on the American Academy of Pediatrics, the AAP. Everyone knows them, love them or hate them. We'll see.
Right.
Then the new Trump administration just getting started. What are they up to? And, well, this whole situation with the mayor of New York City, it's getting pretty intense.
Yeah, I've been following that one.
So let's unpack all of this, see what we can learn, and maybe even connect some dots between these things that seem totally separate on the surface, you know?
Yeah, sometimes the most interesting insights come from finding those unexpected links.
Totally. So why don't we start with the AAP? One of your sources talks about their experience as a new parent back in 2004. Remember that whole no screen time for kids under 2 thing?
Oh, yeah, that was a tough one.
Right, like instant guilt if your kid even looked at a TV screen, and this source uses this personal story to kind of launch into a bigger critique of the AAP. They're saying that the AAP has basically gone from being just a medical advisory group to like a liberal leftist social organization with a politicized agenda.
That's a pretty strong statement.
It is, and they give some specific examples to back it up. So first, the screen time thing. They point out that the AAT was so adamant about no screens at first, and then they kind of backtracked, revised their recommendations, and this source sees that as a sign that they're often in error, never in doubt.
Yeah, I could see how that could erode trust, when an organization seems so sure of itself and then has to change its stance later.
Exactly. And then it gets even more controversial. They talk about transgender medicine, and the accusation here is really intense. They're saying that AAP basically jumped on board with certain approaches that are in absolute direct opposition to the evidence of the harms caused to children.
Wow, that's a very sensitive topic, obviously, with strong opinions on all sides.
Absolutely. And then there's the COVID-19 pandemic. This source argues that the AAP was initially pretty reasonable about reopening schools, but then flipped their position after President Trump came out in support of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're basically accusing the AAP of aligning with teachers' unions and contributing to schools staying closed for way too long.
So the implication is that their decision was influenced by politics rather than just the science.
Exactly. And the critique goes on to target their stance on masking. They claim the AAP's insistence that masks don't affect kids' language development is illogical.
Right, I remember that debate.
Yeah, and then there's the whole hypocrisy argument. This source points out that the AAP spent years telling parents to limit screen time, but then when the pandemic hit, screens became like the only way kids could learn.
Yeah, that must have felt pretty ironic for a lot of parents.
Totally. And, the source says the final straw for them was the AAP's alleged support of Hamas.
Hamas, that's a pretty big lead from pediatrics.
Right. They specifically mention the AAP calling for the release of a Hamas general who also happened to be a pediatrician, but they didn't say anything about the Israeli children being held hostage.
So the source sees that as a sign of bias.
Yeah, exactly. And, all of this leads them to conclude that tons of professional institutions, not just medical ones, might be infected by ideology.
Interesting.
And their takeaway is basically that parents should talk directly to their own pediatricians and not just blindly follow what big organizations like the AAP are saying.
I can see that perspective, questioning authority, especially when it comes to your own kid's health.
Right, and they even make this comparison to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist during the Cold War. They're suggesting that just because someone is an expert in one area, like splitting atoms or being a doctor, it doesn't mean they automatically know everything about geopolitics or social issues.
That's a thought-provoking analogy. It makes you wonder about the limits of expertise, right?
Absolutely. So let's switch gears for a second and talk about the new Trump administration. Your sources bring up this whole other set of concerns around competence and the possibility of really radical change.
Okay, so from questioning medical authority to questioning government authority.
Right. And it's interesting because they draw a parallel here to the AAP situation. They talk about people like Elon Musk who have this credibility from their success in the private sector, like with tech, and how they're now using that to try and influence the government.
So it's almost like this new breed of authority figures challenging the traditional ones.
Exactly. And the sources give a couple of examples to illustrate what they see as competence issues within the administration.
Like what?
Well, first, there's that whole Elon Musk tweet about Social Security checks supposedly going to people over 100 years old, some even over 150.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It turned out he totally misunderstood how Social Security records are kept. The sources use this analogy to a jeniza to explain it.
A jeniza, what's that?
It's basically like this collection of old Hebrew texts that were stored away instead of being thrown out. They often contain all kinds of documents, including records about people who are no longer around.
I see. So the point is that just because a record exists doesn't mean someone is actively receiving benefits.
Exactly. And the sources argue that this whole thing shows that Musk maybe doesn't really get how these systems work before he makes these big pronouncements.
Right. A bit of a competence gap, perhaps.
Yeah. And then there's this other example with the Office of Personnel Management. They apparently issued this directive to either fire probationary federal employees or come up with a reason to keep them.
That sounds pretty intense.
And it supposedly resulted in potentially hundreds of thousands of recent hires getting fired, including people who were doing just fine but were just new to their positions.
Wow, that's a huge number.
Yeah, and the kicker is that they all got this form letter saying they were fired for poor performance, which is probably going to lead to a bunch of lawsuits.
Yeah, I can see that happening.
So this is like a different kind of competence issue, right? It's not just about one person's tweet. It's about a policy decision that could alienate tons of people and really mess things up.
Right, it undermines that whole idea of competent change.
Totally. And this all ties into this debate that your sources talk about. It's like this internal fight on the right between the radical revolutionaries who want to just burn it all down and the more traditional conservatives who are more cautious.
Interesting. So different approaches to change.
Yeah, and they see these probationary firings as an example of the move fast and break things mentality, which might work in Silicon Valley, but not so much in government.
Right. Government's supposed to provide services that can't really afford to be broken.
Exactly. And they emphasize that it's not enough to just fire people. You have to actually show real improvements on things like inflation.
Yeah, results matter.
Totally. And they use these two figures to illustrate the different approaches. Elon Musk, who they describe as combustible, and Mitch Daniels, who's known for being more methodical.
It's a good contrast.
So one of the big ideas here is that there's this widespread feeling that a lot of American institutions are broken. The medical system, the government, everything. And that this has created this demand for radical change, what they call brokenism.
Brokenism, huh?
But their point is that change without competence is just going to make things worse. You can't just smash everything without knowing how to rebuild it better.
Yeah, change for the sake of change isn't always a good thing.
Exactly. So for the last part of our deep dive, let's talk about what's going on with Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City.
Okay, this should be good.
It's a wild one. So the governor, Kathy Hochul, has basically said that she might use her power under the state constitution to remove Adams from office.
Wow. It's a pretty big deal.
It is. It's not something you see every day, and it all goes back to this indictment against Adams. He was accused of some shady dealings with the Turkish government, something about influence selling.
So there's a legal element to this.
Right. But here's where it gets crazy. The sources say that the Trump administration actually wanted the Justice Department to drop these charges against Adams.
Why would they do that?
Well, the theory is that they wanted to use Adams as a puppet to push their immigration policies.
So there's a federal angle, too.
Yeah. But the sources suggest that Hochul's move to potentially remove Adams isn't really about the indictment itself. It's because he's been getting a little too cozy with Donald Trump.
Oh, so it's a political move.
Exactly. And apparently a lot of Adams's top people have already resigned because they're worried about their own political futures if they're seen as being too close to Trump.
It's like a domino effect.
And, you know, they point out that Hochul isn't exactly in the strongest position herself. She's described as a crummy accidental governor with low approval ratings and a tough re-election battle ahead.
So maybe she's trying to make a power play.
Yeah, maybe trying to look tough and decisive by taking on Adams.
That's all about perception, right?
Totally. But the sources raise this really important point. They say that removing a duly elected mayor just because of his political affiliations could set a dangerous precedent.
Like what kind of precedent?
They compare it to turning New York into a banana republic.
Wow.
They're saying it undermines the whole idea of democracy, that voters chose this guy, and now the governor might just get rid of him because she doesn't like his friends.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is, and they draw these parallels to things the Democratic Party has done in the past, like with presidential nominations in New Jersey.
So they're seeing a pattern here.
Yeah, like a tendency for the party elite to overrule the will of the people.
That's a pretty cynical view. But I can see where they're coming from.
And they suggest that this situation might reflect a deeper belief within the Democratic Party that they know better than the average voter, that they need to be in charge to fix things.
Like a top-down approach to government.
Exactly. And they even speculate that Hochul could benefit from all of this in the long run, maybe even become a hero of the resistance.
Interesting. So even if she loses the battle, she could win the war.
Yeah, and what's really striking is that there doesn't seem to be much opposition to this within the Democratic Party itself. You'd think there would be some pushback on principle. But apparently Adams is so unpopular that nobody wants to defend him.
So it's like pragmatism over principle.
Yeah, it seems like it. And they even throw out the possibility that Adams might just resign to avoid being removed.
That would be a dramatic end to his term.
Totally. And, they also mentioned that all of this could lead to some really unusual candidates running for mayor in the future. Maybe even someone like Anthony Weiner trying to make a comeback.
Oh, wow. That would be something.
It would, right? And it just shows that in American politics, people never really go away.
It's like a revolving door.
Totally. And, they end with this really interesting question. They ask whether corruption might actually be worse for a politician's career than personal scandals.
Huh. That's a good one to think about.
Right, because all of this with Adams started with accusations of corruption.
True. It makes you wonder what the public is more willing to forgive.
So that's it, our deep dive into trust change and political drama. We went from questioning medical authorities to questioning government competence and ended up with a mayor who might be on his way out.
Quite a journey.
It was. And I think the big takeaway here is that we need to be really careful about who we trust and how we approach change.
Absolutely, especially in this day and age when information is coming at us from all sides.
Right. So for you, as someone who's always trying to learn and stay informed, I think the challenge is to be really critical of everything you hear and see. Don't just take things at face value, question the source, question the motives, and always look for the evidence.
And when it comes to change, don't just focus on the what. Think about the how.
Yeah.
How is this change being implemented? Who's driving it? And what are the potential consequences?
Exactly. And as you watch this whole situation with Mayor Adams unfold, think about the bigger picture. What does it say about the balance of power, about democracy, about the role of political parties?
It's a real-life case study in how these things play out.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
Until next time.
See you then.